Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to a new video. So I told myself that I wasn't going to do this video just because there's so many different opinions and thoughts of how to get this done or not get this done. But since it's so fresh in my mind, I personally just got my crank hub done in my F80 M3. So since it's fresh at the front of my mind, I kind of got all the information that one would need to kind of educate and go over the reasonings and cost and all that with the crank hub in the S55. I figured it would be a beneficial video for people that are not in the know, for people that are more curious about it and kind of trying to get an idea if they should get it done. So I'm going to break this video down into 4 separate parts. Try to make it as easy as possible. First part, we're going to go over what is a crank hub, what is a spun crank hub, what is the purpose of it, what does it do for the car. Second thing we're going to go over is actually the reasonings as to why it could happen. Go over the different opinions and everything and reasons as to why I think it can happen. The third topic, we're going to go over the actual fixes. What does it take, cost, all the different options out there. And lastly, I'm going to give you my conclusion, my overall thoughts, and just kind of try to guide you guys in the right direction and let you know what I ended up doing personally. So the S55 is the motor that we're going to be talking about in this video. It was used in the F87 M2 competition, the F80 M3, the F82 M4, as well as the F83 M4. So it was a motor that was widely used from 2015 all the way up till 2020 or 21 in the M2, I believe. So it was definitely something that was used for quite some time. However, there is one component in the entire motor that is the Achilles heel. The crank hub in the S55 is a very, very important component. And if not dealt with or it does spin, it could potentially be a catastrophic failure. All right, so now that we went over that, let's go over actually what a crank hub is and what can potentially happen. What is a spun crank hub? So over here, I actually have my stock S55 crank hub that came out of my car. This actually gets bolted straight to your crankshaft. This spins. These gears right here are connected to your oil pump and your timing components and everything to make sure everything is running properly. So obviously it's a major component to your S55 to make sure everything is running smoothly in the correct way. Now, for whatever reason, BMW engineers thought it was a good idea to make these into 3 separate pieces. So if we take it apart, we got 1, we got 2, and we got 3. So having these 3 separate pieces is what actually can cause this to slip. So when this is bolted up to your crankshaft, everything is spinning, this hub is actually moving. These gear sets right here should be moving at the same speed and pace as your actual hub. But what can actually happen is the bolt going through here can loosen up over time based on vibrations, how you drive, that kind of stuff, and can actually move. And these gears right here can actually slip off and this can spin while these stay still or vice versa. This can spin faster, what have you. These all need to be spinning at the exact same speed. And if that does happen, the worst case scenario is a catastrophic failure where you get bent valves and obviously pistons and rods and stuff like that would not be good. The better end of it is that it just goes out of timing. You shut the car off quickly enough and all you got to do is get the car retimed and you'll be on your merry way. So now that you guys got an understanding of what the crank hub issue is and how it spins, let's go over the reasoning as to why this actually happens. There's a lot of variables with this whole thing, a lot of opinions, a lot of people saying this or that. So to me, in my research and everything that I have acquired learning about the crank hub, it seems to be 4 common problems. The first one being the transmission that is in your current M2, M3, M4. Now these cars were available in both a manual and a DCT option. DCT stands for dual clutch transmission, and it has been said that the DCT is a little bit more prone to this actually happening, and here's why. DCT actually has a feature called the kickdown feature. Basically, in a nutshell, what the kickdown feature is if you're driving and you mash your foot on the throttle, and then there's actually another little notch that you can push the pedal down to, it drops 2-3 gears into a lower gear, so you can just get up and go. However, the reason as to why this could be the issue as to why it may be spinning is because of the actual amount of torque and power that is put onto the actual crank during the kickdown feature. And when this happens, the crank hub sometimes cannot keep up and then it just spins, and that is when you have the issue. Like I said, manual transmissions are a little bit less prone to that because a computer is always going to be faster than the human being. Yes, it also has happened in manual transmissions as well, but most likely it's because of a money shift or just not paying attention and you did something wrong. But at the end of the day, it seems to be that DCTs are a little bit more prone to it. Although I do want to make this point, these cars, most people option them with DCT. There are less M2, M3, M4s with a manual transmission than a DCT. So obviously the results and the percentage is going to be skewed quite a bit, but even so, I'd be curious to see what the ratio and the failure rate is. Say if there was 100 M3s made and 50 of them were manual and 50 of them were DCT. I'd be really curious to see what the actual difference is and how many actually fail. But obviously that is a hypothetical situation and that is not reasonable, so it's hard to say. But because most of these cars were optional with DCT, it does skew the results quite a bit. So it's kind of hard to say, DCT is definitely going to happen. It can happen in both, but it makes more sense that the DCT is a little bit more prone to it due to that kickdown feature. The second reasoning that I'm going to discuss is maintenance and modifications. Now, this is a very, very vast topic and very vast bullet point, but at the end of the day, if you take care of your car, you do the right things, you do everything early, preventative, the modifications that you choose, if you have to make sure you're doing all the supporting mods with it, you're not just going above and beyond and putting things on the car that you shouldn't. As long as you're taking care of the car, you're not beating on it when it's cold, you're waiting for everything to properly warm up to operating temperature, it's going to serve you well. And that is something that I always preach with whatever car that I have. If you take care of it, if you do all the maintenance on time or early, it's going to treat you well. It's as simple as that. For example, my last car was the STI, the EJ25. Not the most reliable motor in the world, but I always preached about doing your maintenance, about doing proper modifications with reputable and credible brands that has research and the credibility behind their actual product. It's not just something to throw on the car, they actually serve a purpose. And obviously maintenance is super, super important. I always say maintenance over mods. It is more important to keep the car running and keep it running smoothly than adding something that looks cool. So I will always preach that. And in this case, doing your maintenance on time or before, and if you're modifying, make sure you're doing it properly and doing all the supporting mods with it. One thing that I always say is that there's a very big difference between affording a car and being able to buy a car. You want to make sure you're able to afford it because it's very, very different between the two. And only being able to buy a certain car and not afford it is going to make the overall ownership terrible. It's going to make you stressed out. It's just not a good time. So whatever car you do have, you want to make sure you're doing everything properly, that you can afford to stay up on the maintenance. And if you are modifying, you're doing it the right way. The third point that I'm going to go over is that these cars are obviously old now. You cannot buy these or option these out from BMW brand new. That is it. This generation is over. They have moved on to the newest generation. So buying these cars second, third, fourth, fifth, ninth hand is what we have to look forward to. That is the only way we can get these cars now. You cannot buy them new. The reason why I'm bringing up this point is because you don't know how the previous owner or owners took care of the car. Obviously buying it from a family member or a really good friend that you trust and know everything about the car, that's different. But buying these from dealers, buying these, third parties and all different types of places, you honestly don't know how well the car was taken care of. Yes, there are Carfaxes and history reports and stuff like that you can see the basic stuff. But at the end of the day, you're never gonna know if the car was on E85 with a single turbo kit running down the drag strip doing the quarter mile hundreds of times. You just don't know that. It's as simple as that. Yes, there may be some signs in the engine bay with certain bolts undone and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, you're truly not going to know how the previous owner was taking care of the car. Did they just get in and go and just absolutely rip on it? You don't know that kind of stuff. So I always find it a little comical when I see, stories or posts or what have you. People are like, hey, I spun my crank hub. It's completely stock. I never modified it. And then we find out it's been through like 15 different owners. I always recommend doing a PPI, a pre-purchase inspection, when you're buying these cars or any car for that matter. It's something that I always recommend doing because competent shops can actually find certain signs that the car may have been modified, that it needs some maintenance, that kind of stuff. You'll be able to know this prior to purchasing the car, and it may give you a heads up of how well it's taken care of. But again, these cars, you can only buy them secondhand, and you truly don't know how it was taken care of prior. Despite the Carfax and all the history and everything, there's really no signs. So the fourth and final topic that I want to go over is not necessarily an issue that as to why it could happen, but actually something that I do think skews the results quite a bit. Now, social media, videos, forums, posts, whatever, these are places that people go to complain. When people have issues when they spun their crank hub, they need everybody to hear about it. Because honestly, I feel like it's a shameless way to try to get businesses' attention, try to get BMW's attention, that kind of stuff, to say, hey, this went wrong, please fix it for me. I don't feel like paying for it. Honestly, I feel like it's a little bit of a low blow when I see that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're always going to see people complaining on social media, on posts, on forums, all that kind of stuff. 9 times out of 10, you're going to see a thread saying, hey, I spun my crank hub. You know, you're not going to find a thread or video saying, hey, my S55 didn't spin in crank hub. It's totally fine. You know, you're just not going to find that. So when people go to the forums, when people go to YouTube and Instagram and whatnot, they see all these things just blowing up everywhere saying the crank hub is the biggest issue in the world and it needs to be taken care of right now. Truly, at the end of the day, I do feel all these posts and, you know, negativity towards it. I do feel that it puts a lot of fear into people, more so than it really should. I do think it's an issue, but not as big as most people think it is. You know, if you go to an actual BMW dealer and say, hey, how many crank hubs actually spun and how many did you actually fix? And to be honest, the percentages is very, very low. Thousands and thousands and thousands of S55 owners drive their cars worry-free on the stock crank hub and never had an issue. So yes, the results are skewed. You're gonna find more people complaining about it than not. So again, it's gonna put that fear into your mind. It's gonna put that fear saying it's gonna happen. I need to get it fixed right now. Take it for what it's worth, do your research, and then you can determine if it is for you. So now that we discussed what a crank hub is, how it spins, why it could potentially spin, let's go over the fixes, the prices, and then ultimately what I believe is the right route to go. So starting off with the first fix, the cheapest option, that is the crank hub capture plate. This is an actual plate that bolts directly to the crank hub right here, and it is said that it holds this into place and actually prevents it from backing out. These can be had for anywhere from like 100 to 120 bucks. Vargas Tuning actually has a really good one. I believe they are the originators of that modification. A lot of people do run them, have no issues, but at the same time, I've seen people run those and have issues. So it really depends on a lot of factors, but people do run them. It is a very cheap option. Now, in terms of cost to get it installed, it really depends. If you're doing this yourself, it's only 100 to 120 bucks. If you get a shop to do it, you're not comfortable doing it. Obviously, it depends on the shop and their labor costs and all that stuff, but expect around like 400 bucks or so. So at the end of the day, to get a capture plate installed with the parts and labor, you're looking at around 500-600 bucks. Roughly. Now, the end-all be-all fix is actually replacing your stock crank hub with an aftermarket crank hub. There's a lot of different brands, a lot of different options that you can personally go with, but honestly, I personally think the best ones to go with are a single piece, one that's keyed, or a 2 or 4 pinned option. Now, personally, I went with the Gintani one, which is a single piece crank hub with a keyed option. So basically, on this side of the crank hub, there is a little kind of notch here. You actually drill into the area where this goes and it locks it into place. There's no chance of that ever happening or spinning. All these gears and everything is just one piece. There is no chance for it slipping. There's no chance for anything to happen. So it is a bulletproof way to do it. Now, there's some other options out there that I do think are very good. The SSR version as well is a 4-pin option. That is actually made up of 2 pieces, I believe. That one has a locking piece that kind of goes in and locks into place. It also has 4 pins on this side that you drill actually into your block for it to, or into the crank to actually stay into place, which is a good option. There's also one called the Insane, but that's also a great option as well. I believe that's 2 or 4 pinned. So now in terms of cost, they range anywhere from about 800 bucks all the way up to 1,400 bucks. Naturally, I went with the most expensive one, the Gintani, which is around 1,400. I personally think that is the best option out there after all the research that I've done. So that is the one I ended up going with. Now, to get this installed, I always recommend going to a place that has done this hundreds of times, somebody that really knows this whole entire project and knows how to get it done properly. Don't go to some hole in the wall just to save a few bucks. I honestly believe you should really do your research and find a credible and reputable shop to get this done. It's a very, very detailed and thorough job. So I do recommend getting this done by a shop if you're not comfortable with it. If you can do it yourself, that is fantastic. You can save yourself a boatload of money. But if you're not comfortable doing this job yourself, expect anywhere from like 1,500 to 2,500 bucks worth of labor plus the part and everything. So it really depends. So you're looking at anywhere from like $2,500 to $4,000 to get it installed. For me personally, I went with the Gintani. It was $3,750, and that includes the OEM hardware, the oil change, everything that is involved with the crank hub replacement. Now, there's a couple other add-ons that you can do as well when you're doing the crank hub. It's entirely up to you. I've seen the seal guard plates as well that actually goes around the crank hub on the outside to prevent the belts or anything from slipping in and causing a failure. Capture plates, I've actually seen ones that are plates and then they cover over the bolt here as well. So there's a couple different options. I've seen people do crank hub, full crank hub replacements with the actual capture plate. A lot of different ways to go about doing this. Obviously do your research, find which one's best for you, which one works for your budget and everything. At the end of the day, this is something very, very important. Obviously a major component to how your S55 is going to function. So it's not something you want to cheap out on. It's not something you want to save a few bucks on. I do recommend, as I mentioned, going with a very reputable shop that can honestly prove their credibility and that has done it many, many times. Going to a hole in the wall, yeah, you'll save a few bucks. Honestly, I would rather spend a little bit more getting the replacement done by somebody or a shop that really knows what they're doing, as opposed to, completely grenading your $20,000 plus S55 motor. So now that we went over everything, you guys may want to know my opinion, and I'm going to let you know that. Now, again, take this with a grain of salt. This was just my personal experience and what I decided to do with my S55, and I'm really glad that I did. Again, as I mentioned, I ended up doing the full replacement with the Gintani one-piece keyed crank hub replacement. I got mine done at Auto Couture Motoring. It was $37.50 to get that knocked out. Yes, it's pricey, but 100% worth it. Should you do it or should you not do it? Based on my experience, I'm going to tell you, you should do it. My car is a 2018 F80 Competition manual. I got the car with 18,000 miles. It currently has 21,000 miles. This car was as clean as can be. I got it PPI'd, no signs of any modifications. It was maintained like crazy, huge maintenance list and history and everything about the car. It was thoroughly looked over. Perfect car. Honestly, I don't think you can get a cleaner car than this after all my research and the probably 50 different M3s that I looked at. But I'm going to show you something that shocked me when we are actually doing the crank hub replacements. Now, as you saw in some parts of the video, this is actually my stock crank hub, made up of 3 pieces. But there's one thing I want to mention, which is a little scary and a little shocking. Between each of these little gears is actually friction discs. So if we pull these apart, you will see these little discs in between each of them. Now, when this was pulled out of my car, I'm going to put up a picture for you guys at Auto Couture Motoring. They snapped a shot of my crank hub, how it came out of my S55. And as you can see, the friction discs on both sides were actually cracked and one piece was actually missing. And the missing piece, as you can see, is right here, or the piece that was on it. There was one missing piece to this whole friction disc. Then if we look on this one as well, kind of hard to see, this one is actually split as well. So both of my friction discs were split on my stock crank hub, which is crazy. That is a really good sign, or not a good sign, a bad sign that it can potentially and most likely will happen. Now, it's not something that you can just check, obviously. You have to get to the crank hub to see if that's actually happening. But I make these videos because I always like to steer people in the right direction. Based on my experience with my car and the condition of it and the low miles and how it wasn't modified and everything like that, to see that these friction discs were actually cracked and split, I'm going to go and say that I highly recommend getting this done. I understand it's a very, very pricey thing to do, but spending a few grand to get this done as opposed to spending, tens of thousands of dollars to get your entire S55 motor replaced, I'd rather invest in doing the crank hub now, enjoying a trouble-free ownership and never having to think about it again. Even if I was keeping this car stock in terms of power, I would still be doing it because at the end of the day, I'm going to be sleeping so much better knowing that it is completely bulletproof. I don't have to worry about that. I can drive the car as hard as I want and enjoy it and not have to worry about the crank hub ever again, not have to worry about things slipping or friction disc breaking or anything like that. And also a really good point is selling the car eventually, maybe at some point in the future. Having the crank hub done is a huge selling point. To be completely honest, I'll probably make 70% of that back when I sell the car, possibly even 100%, depending on the market and all that stuff. People that are looking for these cars, they know about the crank hubs. And you mentioned that it has been done and you have documentation, pictures, videos, whatnot, obviously an invoice and everything to show it was completed. It's only going to make the new buyer of that car feel way more comfortable in the purchase and make them understand that, you may be asking for a little bit more than a, non-replaced crank hub car. They will take that into consideration and you'll probably get most of that back. So it's a great selling tactic as well. So to be honest, saying you're spending all this money to get this done, and then if you eventually sell it, you'll probably make most of that back, to be completely honest. So that is the crank hub issue in a nutshell. I explained what it is, what the issues may be, how to get it fixed, the cost of everything, and what I personally think you should do. At the end of the day, people are going to do their own thing and, believe what they want. This is just based on my experience with my personal car and what I decided to do. and all I can do is try to guide you guys in the right direction. So take it for what you will. That is everything that you need to know about a crank hub, the spun crank hub issue in the S55. So I truly hope this video was helpful to you guys, make you understand what the issue is, what can cause it, obviously the fixes and the costs and everything with all that. And at the end of the day, my opinion is only going to matter to people that's going to take my opinion. I always try to make my videos as honest as possible, so I hope I have some credibility here with everything that I do, because I always try to explain things in thorough. I'm very transparent with this kind of stuff. So I do believe when I talk about this kind of stuff, I'm saying it with some credibility and some validity. I'm not just some random person saying, hey, you should do this because it makes me money. Absolutely not. I'm simply just trying to guide you guys in the right direction and make you guys enjoy your S55s to the fullest. So that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions all about the crank hub, the fix, the whys, or anything else maybe that I didn't mention, leave them in the comments below. But in the meantime, keep it clean, keep it simple, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.